We're an AI company using AI to build our AI product.
Yep.
So I think we're going to be sharing more of these types of very tactical and useful use cases so that other folks could use AI in their own day-to-day lives more, I guess, more intelligently, if that's allowed to say, pardon the pun. Hi, my name is Stella Garber, and I am one of the co-founders of Hoop, a new AI task manager for busy professionals. And I'm here with my co-founder, Justin, and we are talking about how Justin used AI to help us with a very common problem that a lot of startups have, which is as our support volume's increasing, we want to make sure that we're staying on top of our customer requests, that everybody on the team is understanding what people are asking for, what problems people are having. And Justin thought, hey, shouldn't AI be able to help me with this? So let's get into it, Justin. Specifically, like, what was the problem?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of nailed it. As we've grown, support volume's higher. Everybody used to kind of just know what was coming in because there was a few enough cases. But now that numbers increased, in some ways we're losing touch with all the cases, and I wanted to make sure that didn't happen.
And that's so important for a startup, right? Like, to really have a pulse on your customers, and not only to build relationships, but also to just really have empathy and understand how they're using your product.
Totally, yeah. And for all roles, right? Obviously, designing solutions, building solutions, like you want to understand the customer pain points, how frequent they are, what are the nuances of them. So that support inbox is one, it's not our only channel, but it's one big channel where we learn about that stuff. So it's an important piece of our process.
Yeah. And we also, and just to give context too, we get most of our support inquiries through real-time chat on the website versus, let's say, email or text message or anything like that. So, and then the tool that we're using is Intercom. Okay, awesome. All right. So we want to get all of this gold out of Intercom, but it seems like it's a highly manual process. At what point are you like, AI should do this for me?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, oh, I'll just like pull this together real quick. And then I was like, oof, there's a lot of cases in here. Like, this is going to take me a while and be a pain. So then I was like, well, AI should help with this, right? So how can I do that? And then the problem became like, how do I get those cases out of the inbox? And I did a quick Google and I was like, Intercom has an API. I could like maybe pull those out somehow. So I actually did that. There's an app called, I have like a technical background, so I know enough to be dangerous with this stuff. I can write code, I can break things. So I was like, I can get in here and mess stuff up a little bit. So I looked up the API. There's a tool called Postman where you can make API calls, and I started there. And actually they have a very cool AI feature where you can take the results of the API call and kind of give Postman a prompt of how to transform that. So it dumped what I wanted into a JSON output from the API, but I used their little AI feature to turn that into a table that I could copy and paste into Excel. So that was the very first like basic step. I didn't start out wanting to build a whole thing, but that was kind of my first step. And that was cool. And I was like, okay, this is progress. Like, I saved myself a bunch of time. Now I got these cases. Let's create a summary. And so that's where I started out.
How would you have done that in a pre-AI world? Like, what steps are you replacing?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. I could have previously written code to get the support cases out of the API, but to get them into some kind of like a more human readable format, a table or something like that would have been more of a pain. I would have had to write some more code to transform that, which, doable, but now we're talking instead of like 5 minutes, we're talking like 1 hour at least of messing around. Probably if I'm feeling a little rusty, maybe 2 hours. Like it would be more of an effort for sure.
And Postman, at this point, are you using it for free? And how did you know that was the tool to use?
I just have the free version. I have used that in the past back in the day when I built the Trello iPhone app, I used that a lot. So it's just been a tool in the quiver for a long time. It's gotten a lot better since then. And, I don't know, every now and then you got to make an API request. So it's something useful to have around.
Awesome. All right. So what's the next step?
Okay, so that was a big step. Right now I had the cases, and then I was kind of looking through them. Maybe I can create a summary manually, just kind of like perusing these and noticing trends. But once I had it in tabular form, I was like, I could like pass this over to ChatGPT. I could copy paste this and put it in there and see what that does. So I did that, and I just said, here's a pile of support cases from the last week. What are the top trends? And pretty quickly it gave me some output. It wasn't great, so I spent some time kind of modifying the prompt and being more specific, but it got pretty useful. And then beyond that, I also asked it to list the IDs associated with those so then I could go kind of double check it. So for every kind of trend or theme it noticed, it said this is related to case, X, Y, Z. And I would kind of go through and look those up and just make sure it seemed like it was doing the right thing. It wasn't just imagining stuff. And that was good. That was a great one-time summary right there. Didn't take long.
So that was like a sort of a QA spot checking the
Yeah.
hallucination kind of a
Yeah.
thing. Got it.
Just to make
Okay.
sure, like, is this, I mean, I read it and I'm like, is this like, too vague, too specific? Like, is it kind of the right level of detail that I want? And then after that, like, is it actually accurate? Like, are these really trends? Like, if I go into these cases, is that actually what's being discussed in these cases? And it was pretty good. So that was my first thing. And I posted that. We have a weekly meeting on Thursdays. I posted in the agenda, shared it with the team. That was the start of it.
And then you hooked it up to be giving daily summaries of the support cases in Slack. Tell me about your thought process of taking that one-time sort of analysis and creating an integration or sort of bot with Slack.
Yeah, so there was two things that came together there. One, people responded well to the first summary. And so I was like, oh, maybe I should do this every week. And then as soon as I started thinking about that, I was like, oh, it's like kind of a lot of manual work to do it every week. Maybe I can like automate this in some way and make my life easier. The other side of things was as the support volume has increased, we haven't been as good about keeping up to date on like how many times was this feature requested, how many times was this bug reported. We're starting to lose track of that. And that's another thing that I felt like we could automate. So I had that in my head too, of like, how do we do a better job of extracting the insights from the support cases? And as I started to realize like, oh, I can use this API to get at these, maybe these two things can come together and maybe they're kind of related. So I started to think about that.
You'd think Intercom would do that for you though, right?
There definitely is some of that. To be honest, I didn't look super deeply into it. I know the version of the Intercom plan that we're on doesn't have all the AI bells and whistles.
Exactly, because it's expensive.
Yeah, and this is a challenge with a lot of the AI functionality. A lot of the SaaS tools we use, the AI add-on like doubles our price at least. But the other thing is we already had a database of this stuff in Notion, and I wanted to sync those things up. And even if Intercom could do some of the work, it wouldn't be synced up with what we had in Notion.
So how'd you do it in Slack?
Yeah, so this is where it got cool. I had a couple hours. I got a little ambitious. I've used ChatGPT a lot, but to be honest, I haven't used it to really write real code that I wanted to use. I've used it to like syntax check something or whatever, or error, check on an error, but I didn't use it to like write code from scratch. So I was like, let's do an experiment here. Let's see if ChatGPT can write me a script here. And so what I ended up doing was integrating the Intercom API, ChatGPT's API, I guess it'd be OpenAI's API, the Notion API, and the Slack API. And so I kind of like iterated. It was a series of prompts. It probably took me 3 hours. And at first, I was basically like, pull down these cases from the Intercom API. Let's get that working. We got that working. Then it was pull down this database that we have in Notion. We got that working. Then it was, okay, we can take all this stuff. I got that working. Let's send all that plus this prompt over to OpenAI and get the response back. I was asking for the response in JSON, so got that working. Realized it doesn't always come back in JSON because AI does its own thing sometimes. So added in some sort of retry logic for robustness. Got that working. And then I was like, okay, cool. This is actually pretty useful. Iterated on the prompt a little bit to get it into the format that I wanted. And then I had it actually, I didn't tell you guys this. I had it working for like 2 or 3 days.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but it was just DMing me to see if it actually worked and if it was actually good. I didn't put it in the team space right away. And there were some bugs and there were some things that it did that didn't work. So I fixed it for a little bit. And then once I was like, okay, it's pretty useful, I switched it. So we have a support channel in Slack. And now every day in the evening, it posts an overview of the last day of activity in the support inbox. And hopefully, I mean, you can tell me, hopefully it's useful in just keeping people up to date and giving them an overview of kind of where the action is in the support queue these days.
The way that we do support, we usually have one point per person because support is obviously super important and we want to get back to our customers very, very quickly, but it's also can be very distracting, especially if we're doing more focused work. So we generally have one person on support every day and that switches off. And if you're that person, you know exactly what's going on. But if you're not that person, then it can feel a little like you're sort of cherry picking as you hear about cases that get escalated. So I found it to be awesome. It's to me, and why I thought this was a really interesting conversation was that this is exactly the kind of use case for AI where you're taking something like very manual and automating it in a way that you maybe couldn't before because of the text analysis and summarization. So if somebody wanted to build something like this, but they weren't maybe as technical as you are, do you have any sort of recommendations for, because I'll say, like, I think one thing that can be hard is just understanding how to get to the end part. You're like, well, I have this problem. I'm not sure. How do I get there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had some of those problems too. I mean, like I said earlier, I do have a little bit of a technical background. So like, I could have written this code. It would have taken me much longer. And that's kind of what blew my mind. I think I saved myself day or two of effort for sure. Like I did this in like 3 hours and it probably would have taken me a couple days or something to do it before. So I was pretty blown away by the efficiency there. It did help to have a technical background. Like I looked through the code. It ended up being like 350 lines of code or something. So it's not, I mean, it's not a huge amount, but it's not a tiny amount either. And I would read through it. And there were times, for example, Intercom's API uses a particular parameter for paging. Like you can't pull down all the cases at once. You can pull down at most 150 at a time, and you can loop through to get all of them. I noticed that it was doing that wrong. And I was like, hey, I think you're doing this wrong. It looks like the API docs say this. And it was like, oh, you're right. And now I fixed it. So I don't know why I did it wrong the first time, but it did fix it. But like kind of understanding the code and being able to tell it that was helpful. There was other times where it did things wrong and I didn't notice, and I would just get an error message. And in those cases, I would just give it the error message and be like, I'm getting this error. And it was like, oh, this probably is happening. And I was like, okay, fix that. And it would do it. When I got the script into like a decent place, I actually asked it. I was like, hey, this is cool. How do I put it somewhere where I can run it on a schedule? I don't want to install anything on my computer and I don't want to pay money. And it was like, it gave me a bunch of options. It gave me Glitch from old school Fog Creek, gave me Replit, which I ended up using, and there was like 2 or 3 other options. I had heard and seen people using Replit, so I was like, oh, this is a cool chance to try Replit. So I was like, how do I do this in Replit? And it walked me through and it said, set this up, put the secrets here, set the environments like this. So I tried to kind of take my brain out of it as much as possible and just ask it and do kind of follow the steps that it gave me. And it worked.
And this is, I think, the really powerful thing here is like you used the AI to teach you how to use the AI or to help you to understand how to, what the process should look like.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's also an interesting thing where like, everyone's afraid of AI replacing their jobs. And it sounds like here, this is an example of actually how it can augment your job, but also you still need to be able to get into the code and see exactly what's going on and understand. Otherwise, you can't just, it's not replacing somebody.
Yeah, and maybe like as the models get more and more advanced, like maybe I could just give it like several paragraphs and it would just like do it and be super smart about it. I thought what was cool is like I didn't even have a full picture in my head of what I wanted. It was sort of like, oh, I got it to this step, and I was like, oh, that's cool. But if it did this extra thing, that would be even cooler. Oh, now it does that too? Like, oh, but what if it did this? And it was sort of like this building to where I got it to something useful. And I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, I was pretty blown away. I mean, it saved me days. It's running. It's just kind of on autopilot now. It just posts every day, except on weekends. I told it to skip weekends. And the fact that you can use it to kind of navigate errors and figure out deployments and all that was really cool. There were some bumps in the road for sure. Like there's some, even now, if I want to go add something to it or fix it, there's a couple annoying parts. But overall, it's pretty cool. And you can really see when you do stuff like this that as the models get more advanced, as the technology continues to improve, it's going to be pretty insane what you can do in minutes that would have previously taken hours or days.
Okay, so maybe last question, you can go through the bumps.
Yeah, I mean, some of it was, like I said, like sometimes it'll just do silly stuff. Like it will, like I said, it just didn't do the initial intercom call correctly. It kind of got half of it right, and half of it just sort of did like generically. And so we had to go through a couple, some of it I noticed, some of it I didn't notice. So there's a couple like cycles where it's like, the code doesn't work, fix it. And then you're like, finally it works. That was part of it. There were certain things where like I would ask it to do something and it would do it, and then as we kept iterating, it would lose one of the previous things. Like it would like, because it kind of keeps rewriting the whole thing. I was using the Canvas, ChatGPT's Canvas thing, which is
cool.
pretty neat. So it keeps rewriting the whole canvas, not always, but usually. And sometimes one of the previous things would just disappear. And then I'd be like, hey, we lost that bit about, I forget what one of them was. It was like some logging code. We lost where we were logging this thing. And it's like, oh yeah, I added that back in. I'm like, well, that's weird that it just loses stuff. The big thing that became a hassle is as the script became longer and longer, ChatGPT seems to have like a limit around 250, 300 lines. So now when I make a change and ask it to update the script, it will do it and it'll print the first 250 to 300 lines, and then it just stops like halfway through the file, and it just won't print the rest. And sometimes you can coax it into printing the rest by saying like print the whole file or something like that, but other times you just can't. And you start having to do this annoying process of copying and pasting bits together to get the whole thing. So again, I imagine as the technology continues and the input and output token limits get raised and that sort of stuff, these problems will go away. And but as it got more nuanced, I started to run into more friction points. But it got me all the way there. It works. It's running. It's a part of our process now, and it's pretty cool.
Well, thank you, Justin. And we're an AI company using AI to build our AI product.
Yep.
So I think we're going to be sharing more of these types of very tactical and useful use cases so that other folks could use AI in their own day-to-day lives more intelligently, if that's allowed to say, pardon the pun.
Definitely.